Okay, so Maggie, question time. I'm so excited to be talking to you. I feel we haven't done anything. I say face to face, but because we live on opposite sides of the city, this is usually how we do face to face on a
Right.
computer screen. But we haven't since the pandemic started.
This is great. This is
I
good.
know. Okay, so we were getting ready to talk about how we both got into academia. You were an elementary school teacher, right? How did you tell me about that?
Yeah, so I was an elementary ed, special ed, psychology undergrad. That was my major, and it was throughout my training and my student teaching that, I was sure that I wanted to be a teacher of some kind, but I realized by taking one communication class that just happened to be in Hawaii,
Oh,
that
nice.
yes, that I wanted to learn more about the communication aspects of it. That in studying to be a teacher, I realized that people just assume that teachers can communicate. And it was in this class that I realized that we aren't always taught how to communicate with our students. And so I
Like
thought,
doctors, they're not really trained to communicate with patients. They're
right,
trained to find and solve problems.
exactly. So I started to see the connections, and then throughout that, I started to get more interested in issues related to health, and so that led me to I didn't know what else I could do with those interests except for getting a PhD, and so so that led me to Ohio University where I finished that, and my job at UNC Charlotte was my first job, and will probably be my last job. Until I
Hope so,
retire.
that'll keep you close.
Yes, exactly.
I had a little bit of a different route. I was a history major in college, and then I was drawn to, at the time, what we would call, they were calling it public administration, international development. So I ended up going to graduate school for that in Scotland. Pro tip, it's a quarter of the price, and you get to live in Scotland. So I was there for a year, and then I came home. Wasn't sure what I was going to do. I was actually trying to move to work with a nonprofit in Switzerland, and the money I was going to have to raise to move there to start the job was like 150. I don't know. It was astronomical. So I was asked to start a nonprofit here, and I did, and we made it past the 2-year mark, which was um, 75% of nonprofits don't. But we worked with college students. Aha.
Yeah.
And I really, really enjoyed working with college students. And I had continued teaching history here and there for some colleges that were in emergent need. Honestly, someone died, and I took over Western Civ course and really enjoyed it. It wasn't, I mean, I had a degree in history. I wasn't like, let me look up who Charlemagne is. But um, those two experiences together, and then being on the field, I remember being in Burundi and listening to a policy conversation, realizing that a plan that was being pitched was similar to something that hadn't worked under the Dutch or the Belgians. And I was sort of like, so during the colonial period, but I was still 23, 24. And so people were like, okay, thanks. And no one really listened. And some of the projects that I ended up being involved in didn't work. I think in part because of some of the similarities.
Ageism.
Yeah, and because of that, yep. And so one of the things I realized was that I might have a bigger impact in the way white people did things overseas if I could go back to the college students and teach them the history of how people got into positions. I still had a lot of my own unlearning to do, um, and still do, but that was really the start of that process for me. And so then I went back to get a PhD, and through a long circuitous route ended up in Charlotte And I started doing medical history when I was studying at the New School in New York City. And I ended up at the Center for Jewish History and started doing work on a midwife there. And I was hooked into medical history from that point because it is so weird. Um, just the weirdest thing. Most of the stuff I read, as you know, I like to do stuff with epidemics. So interesting time to have that interest. Um, but yeah, I've never, have you experienced that too? Like anything you read about health is sort of always bizarre and fascinating.
Yeah, and I think through our research, it's fun to keep seeing some of the same themes that keep reemerging. And working with you, I've realized how it is that we can trace back some of the messages and some of the information that we keep learning that keeps changing, and some of the patterns.
I can't wait to get to some of that dirt later in this conversation. Okay, so how did we meet? Do you want to tell the story or do you want me to tell
Sure.
it?
So
Okay.
when you moved to Charlotte,
Yeah.
um, you were had just lost everything in Hurricane Sandy, and so moved here without a lot of materials.
It was an easy move.
Yes, and so
We have one suitcase.
exactly, except as a medical historian who lost all of her data, that's
uh,
painful. And so you moved here, and your real estate agent who set you up in temporary housing until you could find a more permanent house, or place to live. And she met you and said, I think you would really hit it off with my neighbor. And so we were sort of put up on a blind double date, and we had a
like a
great
triple date, right? Because it was her husband, and then us four. And she was like, my neighbor and my friend Maggie. So I was assuming that her friend was her age, which I was totally fine with. I was like, look, I know zero people in this town. Tell me anyone of any age and I will talk to them. And then I came in the room and I was like, this person is definitely around my age.
right
This is not what I was
your
expecting.
peer. And so we hit it off at that dinner. And you at the time were researching twilight sleep, and
Mhm.
basically by the end of that dinner, we had thought of ways that we could collaborate. Given my interest in doctor-patient communication and your interest in the medical history portion, and so we started our friendship there. And
Mhm.
it was throughout that experience of us first learning to be friends, and I was or becoming friends, and I was about to get married. And
Mhm.
we had a lot of conversations, and I quickly learned, not quickly, but you disclosed to me, after I think you trusted me, that you and your partner were going through infertility treatment. And so I made a couple of mistakes of things that I said. And we grew, I think, as a friendship, sort of talking about that. And it was on one of our research trips that you had a really unfortunate email or voicemail left on your phone in our hotel room.
Yay.
And it was there that I said, there must be more going on in terms of practitioner patient communication and infertility. Maybe that's something we could study together. And by the time we got home from that trip, when we drove home from that trip in New York City, we had another project set up. And so it's just interesting how that twilight sleep project that we worked on together and the infertility project that we worked on together, how that led us to our next project.
Yeah, and I think that, one of the things that was so good and helpful about our friendship is that because we were researching these tough topics and experiencing them and we could talk about them. And I remember the time when, it was really hard for you to share with me that you were grieving not really being able to talk about your pregnancy with me. And I realized at that moment that I had just shut myself down so much about it so that I wouldn't um I don't know. I think I was worried about giving off my own icky feelings about other people's pregnancies. And so instead I just would like deadpan if you would say anything, which is like not how I am as a friend.
Right.
And so that was such a helpful moment to me because I was like, no matter what I am feeling, I have to I have to and can work out those feelings, but literally you are not responding to your friend here, B. Like you gotta your friend is having some a feeling and having like this big experience. Like if you can't show up for it, you would need at least to say that. And I hadn't said like, these are the ways that it's hard for me or whatever. So that was such a good moment for me too, because it helped me understand the ways that um, I wasn't communicating. I was just shut down and pulled back. And I think we've both explored those themes in
Mhm.
some of our articles together. And I did in an article I wrote about what it's like to go through infertility treatment and we've done a documentary and a survey and 5 articles, and it's been amazing. So how did we get to a book?
Yeah, exactly. And so I always joke with people when I talk about our book project, You're Doing It Wrong, Mothering Media and Medical Expertise, that it was kind of like the book wrote itself, that we were both going through various health crises and we were going to be spending a lot of time on social media, researching and connecting with others. And so in some ways it felt therapeutic to write the book because
Mhm.
it felt like the pressure, right, to be productive and to be productive pregnant bodies and mothers and scholars and all of that. So in some ways, doing the research was therapeutic for me, but in other ways, it also caused other crises. Just you
Sleep
know,
crises.
yeah, we talked to people, right, who lost children with either miscarriage or baby loss, or going through crises that were very difficult when we were also navigating our own different postpartum periods and other crises related to breastfeeding or infertility or just being pregnant and navigating that space. So
Yeah, and I think I don't know that either of us imagined that our first books would be about something we were experiencing,
right.
maybe like tangentially related, but not sort of so directly related. And I remember when you were pregnant with Sweeney, we were doing our study with infertility patients, and we had one person withdraw from the study because they knew I was in treatment and they worried that I couldn't be objective. And then we had to read all this, research on that and like come up with our position about that. And then I realized it made me feel better to interview people. And I would kind of let them know at the beginning, this is my history. Like this is what I'm bringing into the room. And then we talked at length about what that would do to the outcome and how much I should say and when I should say it and if I should disclose. And there were certain situations where I felt like that wasn't a good idea. And what did that mean as a researcher? I think that one of the things that I love for people to take away from our conversation here is that um, researchers think really, really, really deeply and really, really hard about what they're doing and what they bring into the room. And I remember when you were pregnant with Sweeney, you had to stop doing some of the interviews because someone you interviewed had a miscarriage at the week that you were currently pregnant when you were doing that interview and wanted to, and we can't have hugely emotive responses, right? We're supposed to hold space for the other person, give them freedom to be vulnerable, but you're still having all of your own feelings. And I remember you calling me after that and you're like, I just can't do more interviews right now. And I was like, that's fine. Like I am loving how this is for me as someone who's never been pregnant, and let me take this on the last couple of interviews so that
Right.
you can, it was just so personal to both of us, but we interviewed different people with different stories. It landed so differently.
Yes.
Um, sorry, I just got really excited about remembering all of that. But I think um, I will bring it back to the question you were already answering so well, which is, one of the things I love about how we work together is that you have ideas all the time. And I remember at the time, whatever I was focusing on, I was just like, oh, I can't even look at that right now. It's so interesting. And I just kept telling you to put it in a Google folder. And
Yes.
we have this drive that is just so full of things at the time that we thought, these are all so interesting. And how are they related? They're not, but let's just put them in there. And then when the opportunity to do a book came up, I remember us saying, like, let's go back to our files that we've been wanting to get back to for a really long time. Let's go check those out. And we did start to see some of these themes emerge, which interestingly is that you're always doing it wrong if you are a person who is parenting a child. um, but we were hearing this for years before we actually wrote the book from people in the infertility community, people that were grieving children that they had lost, people who were pre-fertile,
Yeah.
or the stage that we talked about at the beginning of the book when you're like thinking
Preconception.
about trying to have children. And there's a lot of products now for, I don't know, you can like clean out your metabolism
To
and
help you
stuff.
get pregnant.
Yeah. And I'm not saying, okay, anyone who's like, hey, I'm doing that, I don't like you now. What I mean by that is that there is a lot of pressure to have perfect health and to have a perfect body that people who contribute sperm to the conception process don't have to do. And I will tell you, from the variable studies that we looked at, egg quality is not the only thing affected by pollution and smoking and lack of sleep and caffeine. And it's also not affected in ways that are like, your egg quality just went down 40%. I just always think about our grandparents. All of our grandparents smoked because everyone smoked. And that was when the greatest generation baby boom happened after World War II. Literally, all of those people smoked, and most of them drank a lot. It was pretty common at the time. There was a lot of canned meat as
Right.
well. People had just been through a war. Let's talk about the World War II diet. It was not organic kale smoothie land. That was not what people were eating. And they had people having babies in hallways at hospitals because so many people were having babies. So that's not to say that there's no impact, and that stress can't have an impact, but I just remember the deeper that we dug into things, the farther that we went back, the more important it felt to write this book. Did you feel that way?
Totally. Totally. And that I felt like I found comfort in hearing some of the historical stories and realizing that parents worried about a lot of the same things that we worry about today and had a lot of the same concerns. And so hearing that was comforting to me when I was stressed about something or, Googling, something that if people in the 1800s had Google, they would have been doing the exact same thing.
Right. And isn't it interesting that, I mean, if you think about COVID in particular right now, um, I think because we can do some things, like we can pick one sperm out of 8 million in a sample, and we can be like, that's the one, that's the good one, that's the best one. And we're going to take that one and we're going to inject it into this egg after making a tiny, tiny scratch in the surface. And then we're going to hold it in a lab for 6 days, and then we're going to freeze it for a while at this very specific temperature. And then we're going to bring it to temperature at the exact time this other human person is ovulating, which we have done by shutting down their pituitary gland. And then we're going to put it in at the right moment. So, right, we can do this. That's called IVF with ICSI. What we can't do is cure a virus. So I keep seeing this on social media. There's no cure for a virus. There are antibodies for a virus. You can go through a virus and you can live. You can go through a virus and you can die. Or you can have the antibodies to the virus put into your body. That's it. That's all we have. And I think that blows people's minds. It still kind of blows mind. Like, how have we not unlocked this? We can look at we have the entire genome for COVID right now, and we can't put something in a jar that unlocks it at this point. It's wild.
Really,
I'm clearly in a tangential
I
mood
hope
tonight.
in the next 12 months that we will.
Me too, because as we have both said to each other today, I cannot do kindergarten.
No, I cannot teach kindergarten. I'm doing this job so that I don't have to teach kindergarten.
Really, I chose college students because I'm not built for kindergartners. And
Yeah.
God bless the kindergarten teachers of the world. They're the best sort of people.
Yep.
Kindergarten teachers, and my sister, who is a nurse, and my brother in law, who's a nurse. I mean, there are people out here that, not
Real
that I was
heroes.
confused about elementary teachers and nurses before, but just every day, my appreciation for them grows.
And we picked a different career for a reason. So I'll stop this and we'll go to the next.
Okay.